Hello everyone, and welcome to our weekly Sociology 111 statewide synchronous session. This week we're going to be covering Chapter 15 on religion. My name is Matthew Howell. If you would like to contact me, my email address is mhowell1, that's MHOWELL1, at ivytech.edu. So, religion. We're going to take a look at Durkheim and the sociological approach to religion, take a look at some religions around the world, examine the sociological perspectives on religion, talk about the components of religion, what are religious organizations. We probably won't get to the case study religion in India, but we will cover the social apology in religion, religion in the schools. So what social purposes does religion serve? Does religion help to hold society together or foster social change? What happens when religion mixes with politics? Does religion belong in the public schools? These are a few of the questions we're going to be addressing today. Beginning, of course, with Durkheim and the sociological approach to religion, this would be from the fundamentalist perspective. Durkheim did a lot of his work in a book called The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, where he was examining Aboriginal Australian religions, which would be called sort of animism religions. Durkheim's definition of religion is that religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. He made a distinction between what he called the sacred and the profane. Religion he viewed as a collective act, that is, religion brings people together to act in a collective fashion. It's something that sort of celebrates what he referred to as the collective consciousness of a society. Profane, that is not profane in the sense of profanity, like it's in the sense of dirty. It's just the ordinary and commonplace. Profane, the things of everyday ordinary life. Sacred, as opposed to the profane, are those things, elements beyond everyday life that inspire awe, respect, and even fear. Now, Durkheim believed that things from the profane world could be made sacred in the collective act or ritual of a religious practice. When he was looking at it, he was examining totems in the Aboriginal tribes of Australia. And there was one tribe that used a wallaby, which is a small marsupial, as their totem. Now, hunters would hunt and kill marsupials, the wallabies, every day for food. But this was not killing something that was sacred. It was only when the tribe came together collectively and the wallaby was sacrificed in a ritual that it assumed sacred proportions. We can see a corollary to this in the practice of Christianity. It is just ordinary bread and wine until the ritual of communion transforms or transmogrifies it into the blood and body of Christ. In the ritual itself, the profane becomes sacred. And this is what Durkheim believed, was that really when he talked about religion, what he was examining was the way that communities came together, because he viewed religion as a cohesive force in society. Religion provided functions to society. It illustrated moral boundaries and showed you what they were. Among other things, it increased social cohesion. So, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the functions of religion a little bit later. 89% of the world's population adheres to some religion, and that pretty much mirrors what goes on here in the United States of America, where about 90% of our population professes some degree of religiosity and some form of religion, religious adherence. Only about 10% of our population defines themselves as atheists or secular humanists, which are not religious practices. There are roughly 2.5 billion Christians in the world. Islam has about somewhere between 1.5 and 1.75 billion adherents. So those are the two largest religions in the world. The next would be Hinduism with just shy of 1 billion adherents, somewhere around 989 million adherents of Hinduism. But if we look at Christianity and Islam, we're talking about half the world's population in those two religious traditions. A lot of scholars who study religion talk about what would be called the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, in that Judaism forms the foundation of both Christianity and Islam. In fact, Islam considers itself the successor to Christianity from a religious standpoint. Jesus is mentioned in the Quran numerous times, and Islam does view Jesus as a prophet of God. Where they differ with Christians is Christians have the belief that Jesus was the Son of God, God incarnate on earth. Islam does not believe that. They just believe that he was another prophet along the lines of Abraham, Moses, and the other prophets from the Old Testament. Hinduism, as I mentioned, is the third largest religion in the world. There are a number of gods. They have reincarnation in Hinduism. One of the sacred texts is the Bhagavad Gita in Hinduism. Buddhism also developed in India sometime around 636 BC. Prince Gautama was the original Buddha. Buddhism sort of developed as a reaction to Hinduism. Hinduism had become somewhat decadent. And so Buddhism talks about the path to nirvana or spiritual enlightenment, and the path to that is to sacrifice your worldly desires. Okay, back to that functionalist perspective I talked about. Religion provides functions. Some of the manifest functions. Remember, manifest functions are those functions for which an institution is recognized, an overt function that it provides to society. Religion defines the spiritual world and gives meaning to the divine. Latent functions from the functionalist perspective, remember, unintended, covert, or hidden functions, might include providing a meeting ground for unmarried members. Other manifest functions of religion are, as I said, clearly illustrating moral boundaries. If you think about the Ten Commandments, these are ways that people should act. Provides social cohesion. In fact, in his book Suicide, Durkheim was examining how religion can provide social cohesion and social regulation in the absence of a strong political institution and a strong economic institution. In the book Suicide, Durkheim believed that he would find different suicide rates depending on the type of Christianity practiced in French provinces. He felt that you would find lower rates of suicide in Catholicism than you would in Protestantism, simply because Protestantism tends to be a more individualistic approach to religion, and Catholicism is a more group-oriented approach to religion. In fact, in true Catholicism, the congregation is not supposed to read the Bible, read the sacred text. The Bible is supposed to be read and interpreted by the priest for the congregation. You also have the confessional. It is the priest that tells people when they are in a state of grace. And so these are some of the functions: social regulation, social cohesion, in addition to defining the spiritual world and giving meaning to the divine. These were manifest functions that Durkheim felt religion provided. Now, latent functions that provide social opportunities. People who go to church together may wind up developing a relationship and then eventually beginning a family of their own. Integrative force, well, this is basically that social cohesion. When people come together on a weekly basis, it reinforces the bonds between those people. And that's one of the things that having religion in a society does provide. It provides that social cohesion. Other things it does, it gives meaning and purpose to our lives. When you think about, the importance of religion, one of the things that religion does is it tells you how to live a good and moral life. So it's giving meaning and purpose to your lives. Establishes those moral boundaries. It offers ultimate values and ends to hold in common. What's the ultimate end? Well, you live a good life to be able to gain access to heaven. The values contained in biblical commandments. Strengthens social integration within specific faiths and denominations. There's that weekly worship element. As people come together to worship, it strengthens the bonds that exist between those members of the congregation. However, religion can lead to instability, dysfunction in society. Religious loyalties can be dysfunctional. In the case of, well, a current example of that might be looking at Warren Jeffs and the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints, where individuals' loyalty to the church weakened their loyalty to society overall. And they actually believed that eventually they were going to have to go to war with the rest of U.S. society. So, it says here, religion's emphasis on divine and supernatural allows us to do something about calamities we face. Prayer, appealing to God, praying for the end to some calamity. Also, if we're focused on getting into heaven, what happens in this world can be viewed as a test, right? God does not send us anything for which we do not have the strength to overcome. So personal misfortune, relatively unimportant. That's what the entire story of Job is about. Job worshiped and praised God when he was up. He worshiped and praised God when he was down. He basically said, my life is nothing. God may do as he wills, or as he will. This also leads to organizations like the Salvation Army, faith-based community organizations that provide social assistance in times of calamity. When there was flooding here in Porter County, I'm located up in northwest Indiana in Valparaiso, and it's in Porter County. When there was flooding here in Porter County, the Salvation Army stepped in and not only provided food, but even provided money for hotels if people needed it. When people lose their homes to fire, the Salvation Army steps in to help out. This is a faith-based community organization providing assistance because they view that as their mission. They are soldiers in the army of God, combating poverty, combating misfortune. Okay. This is a little out of order to my mind because before we discuss Weber, we need to really discuss Marx, but we'll go with it. Max Weber wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, in which he examined how religion, which is kind of a part of culture, can influence economic production. He sort of wrote this as a response to Marx's ideas on political economy, that your economic production shapes the nature of all your other institutions. Weber was examining the early Puritans in the United States of America when he wrote The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. He picked a very specific group of Protestants. He picked members of kind of the Calvinist, Dr. John Calvin, followers of Dr. John Calvin, which is what the Puritans were. But it emphasized the disciplined work ethic, this worldly concern, and rational orientation for life. The idea behind this, according to Weber, and the reason that Weber pursued this, was he saw this idea of capitalism as almost a spiritual thing, even in the early colonial period. If you look at some of the things that Ben Franklin said, you know, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. A penny saved is a penny earned. You see discipline, work ethic, this worldly concerns with saving money, and a rational orientation for life. Now, what Weber was saying was that followers of Dr. John Calvin had this idea that the number of people who were going to be taken up during the rapture was fixed. It was fixed at 144,000 people. Calvin came at this number through mathematical manipulation of numbers within the Bible itself. It's a function of the 12 tribes of Israel and so on and so on. So he had this idea that there were only 144,000 people that were going to be taken up during the rapture. That was fixed. It was predetermined, predestined. There was nothing you could do to change whether or not you were one of that group. So how do you know if you're one of that group or not? Well, if we take a look at a person who has a disciplined work ethic, this worldly concerns, rational orientation for life, they're going to be successful in the business world. Success in this life for the early Puritans, according to Weber, indicated that they were one of the chosen 144,000. From this basis, we begin to see, from the early Puritan foundations, we begin to see how an important work ethic and work as a means of accumulating private wealth became important to early United States of America. So the spirit of capitalism emerged as a generalized cultural trait. And you can see that in our society when you think about how do we define ourselves. A large part of the way that we define ourselves identity-wise has to do with the work we do, which Weber would have described as a religious calling. We are called to work. This is one of those ideas he said the early Puritans had, was work was not just work. Work was a calling. You were called to work, and if you worked hard and you did work well, that was one of the ways that you honored God. So, Weber saw religion as something that could bring about social change. It changed the orientation of the early Puritan society, which affected the entire culture of the United States of America with regards to work. We work more, take less vacation, value capitalism. We believe in capitalism and democracy almost equally. Another way that we can look at religion as a force for social change is liberation theology. Liberation theology is a social movement within the Catholic Church. It's an anti-hierarchical social movement that basically says the church should direct its efforts towards eliminating poverty, discrimination, and other forms of injustice. The church should be a social force for good. Liberation theology itself, the idea behind it is that if God, in the form of Jesus, had himself incarnated into the lowest possible social circumstances to show that we are all equal and should all be of equal value and are all of equal value in God's eyes, why in Rome is there so much accumulation of wealth that is not used to benefit anything other than the lifestyle of the cardinals and the Pope? This money should be taken and distributed to the poor. Now, this is creating schism within the church, the Catholic Church. Some adherents believe that this is a good thing, others don't. So this may create dysfunction because it also may place the church against political organizations, political states, nation states, things like that. Especially if the church begins decrying capitalism. It will place them squarely at odds with the United States of America. So, but if you think about the way that Pope Francis has been acting and the way that he differs, think about some of the statements he's made. They seem to be much more tolerant. Pope Francis came from Latin America. Liberation theology was a social movement that originated in South America. So Francis may be a liberation theology pope. I don't know for sure. I'm not that up on his politics, but I'm just basing that on observations of the fact that he wanders out and walks out into crowds and wants to touch people and shake hands with people and meet them as equals rather than being cordoned off from them, as Benedict, John Paul II both were. So now we get to that Marx view of religion. Karl Marx. Marx believed that the economy shaped the nature of all your other social institutions, your means of economic production. And in a capitalist society, you would then see all the other social institutions devoted to maintaining social inequality and protecting the interests of the elite. He said family does it. He said religion does it. He said politics does it. He said every institution does it. Education does it. All these various institutions maintain social inequality. Well, how does religion maintain social inequality and impede social change? You may be familiar with Marx's famous axiom, religion is the opium of the masses. There's a reason he used opium specifically. He said that religion, what he was doing was using opium as a metaphor, saying that religion acts as a soporific, keeping people basically accepting of the inequality in a society that exists in a capitalist mode of production. Religion drugged masses into submission by offering consolation for harsh lives on earth. Essentially, if you are trying to get rich on earth, heaven is going to be denied to you. And so in order to get into heaven, you have to try to live a good life here on earth, not focused on accumulation of wealth. To whatever extent religion influences social behavior, it reinforces existing patterns of dominance and inequalities. If we look at the Christian religion, and I'm using this not because I'm trying to target Christianity, because Christianity has also been a force for social change here in the United States of America and for the implementation of equality. Religion itself provided the space for the civil rights movement to exist. It was churches that gave the space to the civil rights movement to exist. But Marx's view on religion was that by keeping people focused on getting into heaven, it made them ignore the social inequality that existed right in front of their face. Few passages. You cannot serve God and mammon both. Mammon has been interpreted to represent worldly wealth by some religious scholars. The meek shall inherit the earth, right? It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. So if you're rich, heaven's going to be denied to you. Moving on, of course, to the feminist perspective, really, feminism looks at religion as just kind of another social institution that continues the subordination of women. So, how do women generally are the subordinate ones in religious congregations, in religious societies with a high degree of religiosity. Depending on, and you can look at any religion, they all seem to kind of do it. You know, people say that Islam unfairly subordinates women, but honestly, Christianity subordinates women as well. Proverbs 31, the role of a goodly woman. Really, it talks about how a woman is going to listen to and obey her husband. I mean, if we look at marriage ceremony, the vows in there, promise to love, honor, and obey my husband. It's only recently that both partners are either saying obey or neither partner saying obey. Traditionally, it was women. They take subordinate role in religious governance. They play vital role as volunteers, staff, and educators. Catholic Church, Catholic schools, right? The majority of the educators in Catholic schools are nuns. Salvation Army tends to be overwhelmingly female with regards to the volunteers. Women in our society are more likely than men to be affiliated with religion. I can't remember exactly what the percentages are. 82% of our society affiliates with some denomination of Christianity. 90% of our society affiliates with some religion or other. And I believe there's like a percent difference between men and women. It may be as much as 2% difference between men and women with regards to religious affiliation. So what are the components of religion? First of all, you've got religious beliefs. If you remember, a belief is a statement that a culture holds to be true. So a religious belief would be a statement that adherents of a particular religion believe to be true. And so it's to which members of a particular religion adhere. Fundamentalism is a particular kind of religious belief, and fundamentalism says rigid adherence to fundamental religious doctrines. It's a literal interpretation of religious doctrine. The idea of young earth creationism comes from a fundamentalist approach. The earth was created in 4004 BC. This was calculated by an archbishop, I want to say in the 18th century. Actually calculated it out to 4004 BC by starting from the birth of Jesus and working backwards through all the wars, all the historical events, and all the begats and ages of people listed in the Old Testament, and came up with a figure of 4004 BC. There's fundamentalism amongst members of Islam. There's fundamentalism amongst members of Hinduism, Buddhism. There's fundamentalism. It's not just refined. There's fundamentalism in Judaism. It's not just restricted to Christianity. So fundamentalism is found among most major religious groups. You tend to find what people refer to as secularization, a degree of secularization that occurs in industrialized societies. People stray away a little bit from spirituality, from religiosity. So in developing nations, you tend to find a higher degree of religiosity than you do in industrialized nations. You tend to find a more secular approach to everything in industrialized nations. If you look at the United States of America, and we'll talk about this more when we get to social policy, you can see how even with regards to religion in school, we have changed as we become more industrialized over the last 150 years or so. So we've got beliefs, we've got rituals, and these are practices required or expected of members of a particular faith. Some of the things that we have as rituals: singing hymns, moment of silence, praying out loud or silently, communion. These are all the religious rituals that we have in the largest religion here in the United States of America, which is Christianity. Participation in some of the rituals has tended to decline a little bit. Although the younger generation does seem to be seeking more for what you would call direct experience of God. They read in the Bible about these people who had direct revelations of the existence of God, and they look at the way religion is practiced and how ritualized it's become in a lot of the denominations, and they reject that. They're looking for an epiphany. And we are seeing a slight increase recently as well. As I said, younger cohorts are seeking for that religious experience. An epiphany of religion, a religious epiphany, feeling or perception of being in direct contact with ultimate reality or becoming overcome with religious emotion. So how do we define religious organizations? Ecclesiae could also be known as a state church. A state church is a type of ecclesia. Ecclesia is a particular religious organization that dominates a society. Most or all of the members are adherents of this one religious organization. The Anglican Church of England, although England is really increasingly becoming a secular country, more so than the United States of America. The United States of America has a higher degree of religiosity than most European nations. But Finland, Denmark, Sweden all have official state churches. The U.S. differs in that, so we have denominations, a lot of different religious organizations, and they're not officially linked with the state or a government. The First Amendment basically says that the state shall favor no religion. First, third. But there is an amendment that says the state shall favor no religion over any other, and shall not establish a state religion. Sects, small religious group that is broken away from some other religious organization and maintains themselves somewhat apart. The Amish are an example of that. The Church of Latter-day Saints were a sect that broke away. They find themselves, although the Latter-day Saints not so much, but if you think about the Amish, they live apart from mainstream U.S. society, and they reject a lot of the practices of mainstream U.S. society. They are also not looking to convert people into their religious tradition. The Amish would be an example of an established sect. New religious movement, also known as a cult. Secretive religious groups that represent a new religion or a major innovation of an existing faith. Scientology can be viewed as kind of a new religious movement. Compared with other religious organizations in the United States of America, it's really young. It's very secretive. Very secretive about its practices. It costs money to find out the secrets of Scientology, although some of them have been revealed by members that have left. Similar to sects, tend to be somewhat small, and, you know, despite the fact that there are a lot of famous people that follow Scientology, when you say Scientology, most of U.S. society tends to be skeptical about it, and it tends to be viewed as less respectable than practicing a more established religion. Now, it's not a sharp divide between each of these different types of religious organizations. There's actually a cycle. As you get a large religious organization that becomes well established and has a lot of adherents in society, it will become less strict and less rigid in its practices, and then you will find people within that particular religion that break away to form a new cult or a new sect. And they will be very, very strict with their religious adherence, their religious observations. And they'll attract a lot of new members. A lot of new members seeking for that religious experience will join these sects. But then as the sect grows, it becomes more established, and eventually you have another breakaway. We saw this happen with the Church of Latter-day Saints. They were a small, secretive organization. They broke away, established themselves in Utah. I mean, they had gone other places and had been chased out violently of some places. But then in Utah, they established themselves. They grew, became more mainstream, and then the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints broke away from them in the early part of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century. So we view these more along the continuum and more in a cyclical pattern than This is an ecclesia, has always been an ecclesia, will always be an ecclesia. This is a denomination, has always been a denomination, will always be a denomination. And this is a sect, has always been a sect, will always be a sect. It's not quite that cut and dried. Religion and spirituality tend to be remarkably fluid, and as I said, they go through cyclical patterns. From an individual perspective, you join a religion because it appeals to you, but religion becomes fluid and changes, and you may find that it's straying away from what you believe to be the true practice. Now, the electronic church, rapid rise of electronic church. But if you think about it, like one thing that has become increasingly prevalent in our society is televangelism as well. Another sign of fluidity is the number of mega congregations that are developing. These are large congregations of 5, 10, even 20,000 members in a particular congregation. And when you go to it, it's more like a show, a theatrical show, than it is a traditional religious service. Okay, now here's where we get to that whole policy part. Religion in the schools. There are people who believe that a role exists for prayer and religion in schools. And of course, there is opposition to that idea. In fact, there are people who want to take under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance because they feel like that crosses that boundary between church and state. Right now, the big controversy is over teaching what theory is going to be taught in science classes. We have evolution on one hand as the origins of humans. We have physics, the grand unified theory, M theories as the origins of the universe. And we have creationism and intelligent design. Creationism is the direct acceptance of a biblical account of creation of humans in the universe. A Gallup poll in 2005 demonstrated that as much as 1/3 of our population believes that the origin of the universe, of our planet, and of the human species are exactly as written in the book of Genesis. That's creationism. So, when we look at this issue, First Amendment protects religious freedom. So I was right initially. It was the First Amendment. The church shall not establish a state religion, or the state shall not establish an official state religion. Neither shall the state favor any one church over others. In 1962, Supreme Court found that prayer, outright prayer in churches, is wholly inconsistent with the First Amendment. It was at this point in time that they went to a moment of silence after the Pledge of Allegiance, so that children were free to do whatever they want. Prior to that, the recitation would have been the Lord's Prayer from the King James Version of, or from the book of Matthew and the King James Version of the Bible. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, etc. That was what would have been done prior to that. In 1962, that was ruled that violates religious freedom, so they went to a moment of silence. 1987, Supreme Court ruled states could not compel schools to teach creationism. The textbook that this was initially done, it was in Texas, I believe, and it was a textbook called Of Pandas and People. There were state school boards who ruled that this is what should be taught as the origin of human beings and the origin of the universe and our planet. After that Supreme Court decision, the people who produced Of Pandas and People went back and eliminated the words creator and creation from the textbook and replaced it with intelligent design and intelligent designer. One of the fundamental tenets of intelligent design is that life is so absolutely complex that it could only have been created by intelligent design. One of the organs they like to use for this concept is the eye, because they say the eye exhibits irreducible complexity. You cannot show the intermediary stages between for the evolution of the eye. The eye is a miracle of design, and so there's no way that it could have evolved. Now, biology does have a response to that, but this is what intelligent designers were saying. And so they came back and started challenging again. In Kansas, they've done it twice. They've done it in Dover, Pennsylvania. I believe right now they're trying to do it. They've tried to do it in Indiana. I believe right now they're trying to do it in Texas. They're trying to introduce intelligent design as an alternative theory to the origins of life in high school biology classes. So, for the most part, the Supreme Court and courts have ruled against them, saying that this is just another attempt to introduce religion into science curriculum. So, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to get religion back into school? Well, if we start looking at it from the sociological perspective, we see that some of the people believe that we have become too secular as a society. So, too much separation in schools between the sacred and the profane. We're becoming too secular as a society. We need to be allowed to instill these beliefs and teach these beliefs to children. This needs to happen. Opponents, of course, citing religious freedom, say essentially if you allow a majority viewpoint, a religious majority in a community, they might begin imposing viewpoints specific to its faith at the expense of religious minorities. If we're going to teach creationism, which account of creationism are we going to teach? Is it going to be the one from Christianity and Judaism? Is it going to be the one from Islam? Is it going to be the one from Buddhism? Is it going to be the one from Hinduism? You know, there are a lot of different, we can even go back to the polytheistic pantheons like Greek and Roman religions and Babylonian and Sumerian religions. They all have origin myths. And so if we're going to do this, we are eventually probably going to trample on the rights of religious minorities, their right to practice their own religion freely. So this is kind of the argument as far as like what we see as far as religion with prayer, with taking out the words under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, which was not in the original Pledge of Allegiance. It wasn't added until the 1950s. Prior to that, it said, I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the United States of America for which it represents. And it was one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under God wasn't added. There weren't some revisions made until the 1950s. And now, essentially, children are free to remain silent during that particular stanza of the Pledge of Allegiance if they wish to. So, policy. If we look at what's going on, public school education, most school boards are local school boards. They're municipal school boards existing in municipalities, cities, towns, that kind of thing. Federal courts, of course, have taken a hard line on religion in schools. They have ruled that we cannot teach intelligent design. The most recent ruling, I believe, was in 2010, which ruled against the Dover School Board of Dover, Pennsylvania. And all the Dover, Pennsylvania was trying to do is say that evolution is a theory of pandas and people, presents an alternative theory on the origins of the species of man, saying that it's so complex there must be some intelligent designer. This has been ruled consistently by the federal courts as an attempt to introduce religion into the science curriculum. However, as I said, it's still going on. Texas is now wanting a textbook publisher to publish a biology textbook that has intelligent design in it. And the school board is trying to pressure this particular publisher to do that. So this shows no sign of ending. The interesting thing about this is that if you've ever heard of what was called the Scopes monkey trial, or seen the movie Inherit the Wind, if you go back 150 years, teaching evolution in schools was illegal in most states. What you taught was creationism. Teaching that man and apes have a common ancestor was what was illegal 150 years ago. So if we look at it from a sociological perspective, it's really about not what is true necessarily, as what does the culture consider the valued belief to be. And right now, our culture, not overwhelmingly, but our culture still has a majority of people who believe evolution is a more cogent theory on the origins of species than creationism or intelligent design. Okay, this concludes our lecture for today on religion. If you would like to attend these lectures, just shoot me an email at mhowell1@ivytech.edu, and I'll be more than happy to send you an invitation just before the lecture starts. These are also, as you know, available on YouTube, and you are free to watch them there. I'll make sure this gets posted after I conclude the lecture.